Welcome to the Meeple Syrup Show, designers discussing design, and we're on episode 18, Chaos and Interaction. This is really our excuse for an episode where we can have lots of things go wrong, and then we can say it's part of the theme. But really, we're very excited about who we have on the show. We have Eric Lang and hopefully Bruno Faidutti, although he is maybe sleeping because we asked him to come wake up at a crazy 5 a.m. to be on our show, and understandably, he might still be sleeping. So if he hopefully shows up soon, he'll just pop up on the show. But before we go there, I have to ask Dylan, what games have you been playing this week?
Yeah, I don't even think I've had time to play games this week. I've been doing some work on a design that I've got sitting on the back burner regarding, space stuff. But no, I haven't actually played many games this week, but I hear that you guys have got a lot to talk about before the show starts, so maybe I should just pass it off to you guys. Can we go to Sim?
I can't hear him.
Hello?
Can you hear him, Dylan?
I can't hear Sin.
Well,
No.
I'm going to talk while Sen tries to figure out his audio. Which
Okay.
is perfect. We said this was our Chaos episode, and
Yay.
we're never actually going to talk about Chaos this whole
Oh,
episode.
here I am. Hello.
Hello.
Hey, we just wanted to excuse our technical difficulties.
Yes,
So,
yes.
Sen, what are some stuff coming up?
Oh, we got a lot of stuff on the go. We have a teaching thing tomorrow. Daryl and I will be teaching at the University of Waterloo's GI Jam, which is a game jam that it's really for video games, but this year they wanted to try to work on hybrid games, so games that are requiring physical boards as well as an app or a computer program or something like that. So Daryl and I are going to be doing the Board Game 101 talk tomorrow night there. Daryl, what's the actual name of not the event, but the group that it's part of?
Yeah, so it's pretty interesting. So it's run by the Games Institute, which is actually the largest, if I get this right, the largest research group in Canada, which is fascinating. So they do all these kinds of different studies, people working on PhDs and different types of studies or research grants, anything kind of game theory or game related. So they always have these like postings like, hey, we need pandemic players, and then they like observe them and use the theories from playing a game of Pandemic towards actual real-life research applications. So really interesting studies coming out of there, and I'm excited to be talking. This will be my third time getting to be there, and I'm really excited to be doing it with Sam, where we'll be giving kind of a basic 101 on game design. And then another thing that I want to mention that's on the game design front is that the Nerd Nighters, for anyone who doesn't know, the Nerd Nighters usually runs 1 hour or 2 hours before our show, and they're kind of like the Tonight Show, and we're the late night show. And they actually had David Short on this evening talking about game design because they're running a game design contest. And so for anyone that's unaware, it's sadly too late to enter, but they got such an incredible response that they're going to actually cut it down to 24 contestants, and they're going to announce next week on their show which contestants will be on there. And the fun thing is, Sen and I are a couple judges. So that's two of the things. What am I forgetting, Sen? There's one more thing.
Oh, you're forgetting a Kickstarter thing, I believe.
Hey, yes. Do you want to tell?
Sure. We're doing a Kickstarter. Daryl and I are going to do a Kickstarter for Meeple Syrup specifically. And we're going to try to raise a little bit of money just to offset the costs that we've incurred over the last couple of months and into the future. We've set up a bunch of, really quite lofty goals. The funding level is very low, but we've set up some goals that we'd like to accomplish with the help of people who watch the show, etc., in order to get more content for you guys from designers you want to meet, you want to hear from, you want to ask questions to, bring them into the Meeple Syrup Show live, and perhaps even do some reporting from major conventions around the country, if not the world. So yeah, that's what we're looking at in the next couple of weeks, is getting that Kickstarter going, okay? So is there anything else we need to talk about, or can we talk about games?
Yeah, no, let's get Eric in here. And actually, good news is Bruno is awake. He just sent me a Facebook message, so he's logging in as well. So let's get Eric in here and start talking game design.
Hey, look, it's Eric. So Eric's gonna need to unmute himself, kind of like I did. Hey, and there's Bruno.
There's Bruno.
Hey yo, what's going on?
I could, even though we're supposed to be chaotic, that was a little too smooth. That was
way
that was
too
almost
smooth.
like that was planned.
Yeah.
We're really excited to have Bruno Faidutti on the show with us, and Eric has been on the show a few times, and it's just one of our faves to have on the show. And actually, a lot of our viewers have requested Eric to be on the show more often. So thankful that it worked out for him, even though he's in San Francisco, to sneak us on. So.
Okay, so great, Bruno. Welcome to the show, Bruno. There's a little microphone button way up here that you're gonna need to click on.
Unmute yourself.
And unmute yourself, and then we can hear you.
Okay.
There we go.
Hey.
Ça
I
va bien?
think it worked now. It's okay
Yes.
now?
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Okay, so here I am. Hello, everybody.
Welcome.
Hello. On peut parler en français, hein?
On
Yeah.
peut aussi parler en français, on
Yeah,
doit.
but I think more people will understand us better if we speak English.
It
Comme
would
ci, comme
definitely
ça.
help our viewers, but if ever there is a problem with some translation, we have thankfully Dylan and Eric that are definitely, I don't know how many languages you guys know, and Sen for that matter knows strong French. I, on the other hand, will know nothing. So you can talk all you want behind my back, and I am
Okay.
a horrible
Something
Canadian that doesn't know French.
Of troubles expressing, you will translate. But
Wait.
let's start in English.
So with that said, I want to jump right. Let's just dive right in. I know Dylan is very excited, so I'm going to pass it to him, and let's just go there. Let's just jump right into game design chat. Dylan, start us off.
Well, I really love starting out with something that Bruno has kind of big on your blog, for example, something that you see you stand for quite a bit, and that's the games have authors. I wonder if you wanted to talk a little bit more about kind of games as artistic expression. Let's start off with that.
Yeah, I think the point is, well, artistic expression may be a bit pretentious, but the point that it's just not like techniques. It's just like, no, it's not just like selling cars or that kind of job. I think we are really designing something, and this means there has to be some respect to the work we do. But this post on my blog was, I think, really specifically directed at French gamers and French game publishers, because there is something which makes me very angry. It's a very, very bad French, the very approximative grammar and how badly written are French games translation, even French original games sometimes, and how the publishers really don't care. And I thought it was a bit disrespectful of our designs. And I'm not sure, but my feeling is that it's not really a problem with in the US. And very often when there is a French translation of a German game, I prefer to buy the English translation, because I don't know, I won't have to look at such a bad language and grammar errors everywhere and all that stuff. Or maybe because I cannot spot them in English, but I think there are fewer in English. So really, I think there is a specific problem with French publishers and with French gamers, who very often in their reviews consider games like, kind of, they test games like they test a washing machine or a car. They don't see this as reviewing something that you will like or not, that is for you or not. they just see it as, okay, let's see if it works, which I think is not the good approach for reviewing a game.
Interesting. You know, one thing I do like that the French have been doing more than other countries in terms of respect for game designers and game artists is actually putting the artists' names on the cover. So a lot of the, well, not a lot, but a few of the game companies, let me just see if I can find one here. Oh. So in Colt Express, I think I showed this last week too, but in Colt Express they have the name of the designer here, and then they have the name of the artist there, which is really cool because it does give, it pays, you know, gives respect where it's due in some ways. So that's a nice thing. Eric, how have you ever done any work that hasn't been credited to you in the industry, or how does that work for a lot of the work for hire stuff that you've done in the past?
Oh yeah, I've done lots of work that was not credited. I got to be a little careful because I don't want to call stuff out specifically, but yeah, mostly what I've done that's uncredited is development work, and I'm not sure how this works in Europe, but like there's a pretty strong demarcation between development and design in some of the medium to larger publishers in the U.S. And development work is it's different, but it's crucial, right? Where development, generally the idea is development is to take the design and bring it to using the designer's intent and vision and basically test it from every possible angle and help it achieve its vision under duress, under stress. And I've done tons of that for many games that are currently on the shelf, but in some cases the development process gets a little bit chaotic, so it's difficult to tell who did what. And in some cases it was omitted, and in some cases it was purposely omitted.
Right.
There you go.
There you go.
Unknowing laugh.
Eric Lang, politically correct. I love it. All right, so I could go to Bruno. I mean, Bruno,
I agree with Eric that the development is something very important, which is not always enough credited. And I think even as an author, I'm sometimes a bit shocked that development is not enough credited in my game's development by other people. I think a good example is Masquerade. Because I think in Masquerade I've designed maybe less than half of the characters.
Right.
And maybe more than half were made by other people at repos, and these people are not necessarily quoted in the rules.
Right.
Absolutely. No, I thought that was an interesting point that you put in your article. Anyone who hasn't read your blog, we really want to highly recommend anyone that's a fan of board games, but especially designers. We really highly recommend people to look up Bruno's blog. I'm sure we'll do a screenshot of it at some point as well during the show, and we'll send a link on Twitter. But with that mention of Twitter, I want to say if anyone has any questions for our guests while we're on the show, you can send them to @MeepleSyrup. Or if you're watching on the YouTube, we have a group of people watching right now. If you have questions for our guests, feel free to send them, put them up there, or put them on Twitter, and I'll be one of the people that'll try to squeeze them in as the show goes on. I do have a question for Bruno. I'm a fan of many of your games. You have, I think, something like 80 games credited on BGG. Could you tell us a little bit about how you initially got into game design? I don't even know what your first game is, but I was saying the first Bruno game that I got was Mammoths.
Actually, maybe the first you got was Nightmare Chess, but I'm not credited on the box.
Oh! Talking about credit. Nice.
I'm just credited in the rules, so people often don't know I made it. But
could you tell us a little bit about how you got involved with designing?
You say that French games have authors and often artists credited on the box, but it comes from Germany. It's not. Anyway, how I came into game design, I think I've always been more or less of a gamer. and it was in the early 80s, so I was still a student, and I happened to play a lot of role-playing games, and we played Cosmic Encounter, and we played first proto-German games, you know, Hare and Tortoise, Scotland Yard, and this kind of games.
Yeah.
And I just happened to meet people who want something like first modern born games, more or less in the following of things like what Avalon Hill was doing and that kind of stuff. And I knew them, and they asked Pierre Créquin, who died 2 years ago, and me to try to make something for them, because they knew we were one of the few people who knew everything about games in France. And so we did it. But you know, in this time it was very easy. It was very easy because there were maybe 10 people in France who knew everything about board games. So they had to go for us. Now there are a few, maybe 100,000 people who know everything about
It's definitely grown.
And they're all named Bruno.
They're all
well,
Bruno.
actually, I think I was the only one named Bruno, because the other Bruno came far later.
Yeah. Oh, the other Bruno. I think we have to call him that from now on.
The other Bruno. He's just the other Bruno now. But I was kind of in line to ask a question, but I wanted to pass it off to Eric, because I know you had something that you wanted to ask.
Oh, I had a follow-up for the earlier point about the development thing.
Sure.
Just a little bit, a tidbit. I actually was one of the developers of at Fantasy Flight of Citadels.
Oh, really?
So, when Bruno, I did editing for the rules and a very little light bit of development work.
Yeah.
And in fact,
it's not like with Masquerade, so it's not that much development.
no, see, no credit.
Yeah, you tried to get much credit now.
However, my first email interaction with Bruno, I don't know if Bruno even remembers this. My first email interaction with Bruno was I made a big mistake in calling. Do you remember this, Bruno? I called the game a strategy game originally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was that bad he remembered.
And it was funny actually, because my first interaction with Bruno was to miscategorize Citadels, and a month later my first interaction with Rainer Knizia while I was developing Scarab Lords which was originally supposed to be a collectible card game, was to have to write an email to Rainer to say, no, we can't make your game as a collectible card game because I said so. And oh, by the way, I'm nobody. But I'm going to redevelop your game into a standalone game. That was funny.
So actually, that's a good story. I was kind of going to follow up with Eric, because I was interested in knowing your kind of perspective when we were talking about kind of designers as authors of their games. You're of course working full time as a game designer, and you're kind of put on projects. You're working as a designer and developer. Do you feel that differs to a degree from freelance design, and how?
You know, I'm not working full time as a game designer. I'm working full time as a teacher. Well, part time actually, 80%, and I make more money from game design from I make from my teaching job, but I spend much more time on my teaching job. And so, but of course, it's different for. I think the problem is not if it's full-time or not, or if it's your main job. The problem is that it's easier for people like me who design a lot of games, really want to be credited and recognized in a way as an author. It's true that, you know, young guys who publish their first game, and often they do it by themselves, they maybe sometimes they even forget to put their name on the box. Because Well, it's not really their problem. That's just proud that what they have made is here. But when they start to make more and more and more, it can become more important for them. It's also, it's like with books. When you say of a book, you have to tell the name of the author, because it's also the style. It's also it's really another book by this guy, and it's not a book by someone else. You're reading George Martin or you're reading David Pynchon. It's not the same. Thomas Pynchon, excuse me. I was thinking of David Foster Wallace. I was reading yesterday. It's not the same. So you have to have the name just to see what it is. It's also a help for the gamer.
And Eric, what about your perspective on that, going from not full-time to full-time to this is the only thing that you're doing right now?
It's true. I don't teach most of the time. I don't even work 80% of the time. I work like 5% of the time. I just play Hearthstone most of the rest of the time.
It's awesome.
So I don't actually. I've never been on staff at any company, right? I've always been freelance, even though for several years I was exclusive with Fantasy Flight. So it seemed like I was a staffer, but I've always been independent.
Okay.
So I've always worked. I worked like most freelance designers on a royalty basis, and I was like, Fantasy Flight's a great company, and they're very, very, very good at crediting designers and authors. So since I made my career with working with Fantasy Flight, and I've been credited on every game that I worked with, like that I was the principal designer on. So I've never encountered any issues on that front. I do believe, of course, like Bruno, right, that game design is definitely more art than science. Mm-hmm. The science is very important, but it is almost rudimentary, right? You can fake a lot of it with 2 or 3 years of just good analytical skills and a lot of game playing. And the objective truths are pretty clear. What's important in game is the human element, right? The perspective, the philosophy that you bring to a game, your point of view, and that's what your name earns, right? Like if you came to Bruno or myself with an identical spec, like I'd like you to make a game about crocodiles and hallucinogens. Right?
Okay, we have
as an example.
Crocodiles and
hallucinogens.
Drugs, illicit drugs, Bruno.
He's writing this down as an idea.
Okay. Each of us would produce a very different game.
Yeah.
And that's so. Just based on that alone, I think that's why you should definitely credit a designer, because they put so much of themselves into it.
Yeah. So that's the next contest, by the way, is going to be making a game about crocodiles and hallucinogens for the Meeple Syrup Game Award. I think we have a question from our audience, Daryl.
Yeah, that's right. Actually, from Aldi of BGG, he's asked a question on the chat, and again, I want to encourage people, if you have questions, feel free, throw them on YouTube or send a tweet our way. But Aldi's wondering what. And I think this applies to both of you, but I'm gonna go to Bruno first. What do you think of Fantasy Flight merging with Asmodee? I mean, we have a Fantasy Flight previous employee. We have French designer in the house. What do we think of this merger? How does this impact the industry?
Ruh-roh.
Well, let's say that 15 years ago, I decided that we have a proverb in France which say never put all your eggs in the same basket. I don't know if you have something in English.
Yeah, we have that too.
Yeah, and so I tried not to put all my games in the same basket, and actually one of the baskets is buying all the others. So, wow, that's a bit surprising. I just hope they will stay. But well, I think it's both a good and a bad thing. Of course, it's always a bit sad when you see someone growing and growing and growing, and you think it might make things harder for smaller companies. And But on the other way, the people at Asmodee, even now, even the new guys which are here mostly for making money, they have been well chosen. There are people who like games. There are nice people, and like you say in the US, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. They see that it works. They see that the companies they bought work. They make a good job, it sells, and so they let them still work the same way as they did before, mostly. It's just that they have a good network for distribution behind. So I'd say I'm not wrong with this. I see issues, but I see also not so nice things about it. So,
No, that's great. That's great.
How do I do? What's the way to send you a picture that you could show on the show? I have a picture here that I want to send you.
Yeah, if you send it to me or internally, I can get it to Sen, and he can share it.
How I can send it to you?
You can either on Facebook, or you
Okay.
can send it internally on the chat.
Internally on the chat, I've tried to put.
Send it to me on Facebook, and I'll worry about the details.
Okay.
Okay. So Dylan.
Yo. Hi. Yeah, I'm actually here. I'm sorry. I was just transfixed by the discussion about Crocs and Rocks there. That was pretty masterful. But I was so I kind of lost my train of thought. But let's bring it back to chaos and a little bit about. We were going to talk about culture. And so the chaos bit was I wanted to mention Eric's hair, which is absolutely magnificent.
It's the perfect chaos.
It is. It's
I'm
kind of
doing
like
my best
troll-like.
impression of a Hershey's Kiss.
Yes.
Oh.
It's perfect. It's beautiful. But
I was going to say a troll, but
I actually caught one of the discussions that you had on your Facebook page. I don't want to out you, but you were talking about how judging, how to judge or weigh cultures kind of against one another, and how can people possibly do that. But I wanted to follow on the whole artist angle and ask, what do you think of games as cultural artifacts? Are there differences between games that different countries produce or different groups of people produce?
Oh, certainly, absolutely, yeah. So I wouldn't say that games are a perfect time capsule, like a picture diary or a movie or something could be, but for sure, if you're selective, you could definitely tell a lot about a game's culture by looking at a spread of 2 or 3 games, especially in the same genre from different countries. One of my favorite examples for this actually is a game produced by the Czech Republic, and I wish I could remember the name of it. Bruno probably does, because he knows everything. There was this game that was a sort of a really, really bleak worker placement game that was modeled after the Game of Life, but your 6, everybody's measured in 6 stats, like cancer and obesity and stress. Do you remember this, Bruno? It's such a depressing game. It's funny and it's cynical, but you play it and you're like, oh my god, whoever made this game, they must come from a very, very high suicide rate country. And I looked, I was like, oh, it's from the Czech Republic. I mean, I'm never going there now. No matter how great the food and the beer must be. But it was great. I learned that I implied a lot of culture, just from their sense of humor. I thought it was really, really cool.
Interesting.
If you saw the Game of Life, for example, from a high-end German designer, it would probably look quite different.
Yeah.
It probably would
That's
involve
cool.
a lot of cubes turning into other cubes.
And on that weird note, I want to show you guys. This is what Bruno was trying to send us before. It's not quite Crocs and Rocks, but it's pretty darn close. And
So perfect.
you can't.
I love this.
Oh my god!
Yeah, I know, Eric, right?
This just screams a game. It's ready.
There's the cover for a game. Where
All right.
is
Right
what is
there.
that?
What do you say, Bruno? Co-design?
Yeah, I actually Hervé Marie is working on it.
That's awesome. Crocs and rocks.
Together at last. Together at last. So, Bruno, one of the most recent blog posts that raised a lot of interest from your writings, and seeing as we're talking about culture and all that, was the blog post about kind of Orientalism and cultural misappropriation and things like that. Can we talk a little bit about that, because it being Asian, it sort of struck a chord with me, and Dylan as well, seeing as half his family is Asian as well. But let's can we talk about that? How did you come up with this? Why did you want to write about that?
Well, why did I want to write about it? I think first I had this idea. I remember that 20 years ago when I first played Settlers of Catan, it was the immediate joke. Why is there is no native resistance? I think it was the first reaction when we played it, you know. And I remember our first game of Settlers of Catan, we were always saying, okay, be careful, maybe the natives are here or there. And I think I had kept this in somewhere in the back of my mind. And I happened to read a side much later, only maybe something like 2 years ago. And when I read Orientalism and Culture and Imperialism, it reminded me of this. And I said, oh, yeah, there's something to do with game and specifically with Settlers of Catan. But it was also kind of a joke, because when we made these talks about natives in Catan when we first played it, obviously it was a joke. But I said, okay, maybe there is something. So I tried to think a bit on it, and I decided to make this talk on Gen Con about it without even knowing exactly what I would say. And well, step by step, it became kind of a big joke about this kind of, and it became also serious because, well, I think there is something. So I think that's the story of it. I still don't know exactly in what I wrote what is really serious and what is mostly a joke for me. And I think it's always both at the same time. Actually, seriousness can be fun, and what you find out in real life can be in a way fun to see. And I think there is something. I think there is something very Western in board games, in the way they are designed, much more than in video games. There is something that feels very American or European in board games. It's really traditional culture. So that's the whole story. It's also, I wanted, also as a joke, because, you know, I like to make something about more or less French theory at Gen Con, and I had two ideas. The other was to make something from Foucault's History of Sexuality and see the links with board games, but friends told me, oh, don't do this in the US, it won't work. So I say, okay, let's not do Foucault, let's do Said, and actually much easier. And, well, no, well, I think I had an interesting point, even when it started from a joke. Now what to do with it, I don't know, because I still want to keep on making games like I made them before, because it's fun for me, and, well, and because that's what I am.
Yeah.
Yeah. As for Eric, you know this story about chess history in Essen. I don't know a single word about it.
He scooped me. He scooped me.
He scooped.
He like totally blocked you on that, dude.
Wow.
I know, it's like,
blocked you.
it's funny, he's telling the punchline before I even got to tell the story.
That's awesome. Well, maybe we'll circle around. Maybe that's an after show story. So,
Yeah.
But I'm gonna go to Eric. We did mention at the beginning of the show, our loose theme is, you know, chaos and interaction, and you happen to have a game that has chaos in the title.
I do.
Chaos in the old world, which I often hear referred to as, you know, the perfect example of a sandbox game. I don't know if you feel comfortable with that as a label, but I'm curious. What do you think about sandbox games? Do you think Chaos is that, and what does it take to design a sandbox game?
Yes. No? All right. That's the briefest answer you'll ever get from me. Sandbox game. So I've actually never heard of it referred to as a sandbox game. I guess it has sandboxy elements in the sense that the player interaction is fairly open-ended.
Mm-hmm.
But I've always thought of sandbox games as games without clear goals, right? Without clear linear goals.
Okay, I've heard it used more in the way that you just said it. Like there's a boundary, but there's a lot of openness to interaction. It's just there's some boundaries that people can play within.
Right. I mean, I guess that's perfectly valid too. Like hearing it that way, but so I think Bruno and I share this philosophically quite a bit, right? I like games. I like games where the player interaction is not necessarily scripted in any way, so where the player interaction often leaps out of the box, right? Where the game itself just provides context for players to mess around with each other and gives them some guidelines to role play with, essentially. But the stories that they tell are completely emergent, and they will transcend gameplay as much as possible. With Chaos in the Old World, it was a heavier game, so it's a little bit more mechanical. It's not, say, as sandboxy as something like a pure negotiation game like I'm the Boss, right, which is one of my favorite games of all time.
Yep. One of Seven's favorites as well.
100%.
I mean, Bruno also makes really cool games, even the ones that are really tight, that generally have a lot of chaotic interaction. So the specifically, like, I guess to bring it back on topic, right? Chaos and interaction is that in games with a high degree of chaos, unpredictability between players it's just another form of variance, right? It's that instead of die rolls, instead of card draws. Right, you could have a completely perfect information game with no randomness whatsoever, but if you have open interaction with a bunch of players, you will end up simulating variance just because, based on the mood, based on the level of groupthink that's going on at the time. It's just another layer. That's it. I think it's something I appreciate. I know some designers don't like it. A lot of European designers don't like it very much either because they call it political, right? I get players can choose as a group who they're going to pick on, who they're not going to pick on. Your ability to affect your own victory condition is sometimes diminished by the number of extra players that are at the table.
Right.
Feature or bug, I think that's a matter of taste. I don't think that's an objective truth.
Interesting.
Brilliant. Right. I wanted to kind of go back to culture again because that's a huge thing I love to talk about. And I'll go back to Bruno and say, first off, Décoloniser Catan, it was one of the articles that I liked to spread around as much as possible because I've attempted to explain Saidian Orientalism to lots of people, and that really summed it up very, very well. And I saw in your postscript, actually, that a lot of people took it one way or another, and what I thought was that the fact that you left it so open-ended was actually, I think it was very genius. I think it was a good way to talk about the subject, because really everyone's going to draw their own conclusion anyway. But kind of on this, so set that aside, being a guy who likes to design games about the Japanese culture specifically, just because of my own personal interest, I also asked Seiji Kanai, who is a designer of Love Letter, about Japanese designers designing Japanese-themed games, and so it was interesting. It was a subject that you had brought up in your article that I kind of wanted to hear from a Japanese designer about. Anyway, all this being said, I wanted to just give you an opportunity to speak about another one of your blog posts about the game Les Poilus, which is, of course, illustrated by Tignou, who was killed in the attack on Charlie Hebdo. So it was a very poignant short article that you did. I wonder if you could speak a little bit about that the freedom of expression currently, especially in our own medium.
Yeah,
Oh boy.
that's something I want to say because I've read a few articles in U.S. magazines about this story and specifically about Charlie Hebdo, and I think the U.S. press often didn't really understand what it was. I've read articles saying that Charlie Hebdo was racist, for example, which is really complete nonsense. They were completely the opposite. I think they were old people. I think most of them were 80 or so, and they were survivors, I'd say, from liberal hippies from the 70s, and it was really strongly anti-racist. It's just that they didn't respect anything. They were using a lot of crass cliché in their pictures, but it was almost always to mock the people using these cliches. I know it feels a bit strange because in the US you don't use to make something so crass and direct and obscene, but it was secondary. For me, for example, see Robert Crumb. It's something like this. It's this kind of humor. And you cannot say that Robert Crumb is racist or sexist. He's just playing with this. And it's just using cliches to show how they are absurd. And so first I want to tell this because when I'm saying this thing, and also, Americans who are saying that they were racist and that the problems we have now in France and all this demonstration, which was the biggest demonstration we have since the liberation of Paris in the 40s, is something against Arabs in France. It's completely wrong. It's true that in France there are some politics who are trying to push it this way, but it wasn't on Sunday. And if everybody is saying that it was this, in a way it will become this. It's drawing this in this direction. And I think it's big mistake. That's the first thing I wanted to say. So about Repoiru, Tinius, who was one of the guys, probably the youngest one, or one of the guys killed at Charlie Hebdo, actually was a gamer, more of role-playing games than of board games. He had illustrated a lot of role-playing games in the 80s. And then he went to political cartoons. And he actually had a friend who designed a game which is this Repoiru, which is a pacifist game because, Charlie, they were devoted secularist and anti-religious and also anti-militarist. It's really something from the 70s. Also anti-militarist and pacifist. And so Juan Rodriguez, who is a former guy from Charlie, has designed this pacifist game about the First World War where you are soldiers in the trenches and trying to survive daily life. And Tinius had made the graphics, and he had finished the graphics just 4 or 5 days before the killings. So it's one of his last work. I have not played the game actually. I don't know how it works. I didn't know personally Tinius. So I've surely met him in the role-playing world in the 80s. But this game will be out, I think, in the next months. And really being something really, definitely pacifist and mocking war and mocking the way, and I think how simple soldiers are trying to survive in the trenches. I think it makes for a great setting, a great theme, and that's why I want to talk about this game.
Interesting. So talking a little bit more about chaos and interaction, even just between designers, I know that, Bruno, you've been designing with Eric, and Eric brought one of your prototypes actually to my house one day to play test. Eric, can you tell us a little bit about the other stuff that you guys are doing together?
Well, that's the big one. That's the one that has a publisher right now. Bruno, he's talking about what we call Dilemma. Everybody else knows is the cute animal game.
Yes, that's right. Cute animal game.
That game. Well, actually, so funnily enough, that game it fits the topic very nicely because it is a game that I brought to Bruno. We were I was in Paris, and we had a discussion over wine, of course, over some game concepts that unfinished game concepts that we had, and I wanted to do a game that was based on the prisoner's dilemma, but adding an element of chaos to it. Right, the prisoner's dilemma is always between two people. I want to run it for a group of 4 people with a leaderboard, and start there. And that was pretty much all I had at that point. I had some very basic ideas about how to do it, and then I talked to Bruno about this over dinner. And we had lots of wine, and then we thought, all right, that was a great talk. I think it was 3 or 4 days later, Bruno wrote me an email and said something to the effect of, I know what to do. And he came back with a principal interaction between the draw mechanic, right? You draw 2 cards in front of you, you draw 2 cards in front of me, and then we split it. And then Bruno and I went back and forth of like how many different interactions there must be. I thought that would be cool to have 3 instead of 2, but it was a little bit chaotic. But for a game about chaos, it was probably the most seamless co-design I've ever done. Like it was like literally we volleyed the game back and forth, and after 2 or 3 passes, it was done. I don't think we've changed it much since.
Oh, yeah, it worked.
Well, I'm excited because it hasn't changed. I'm glad that it hasn't changed that much because I really enjoyed the version I played. So.
Actually, Bruno added, and we played a version that had little dials. Because of course everything I do has dials, but Bruno actually changed it to hand signals, and it's much better now. Much better.
Excellent. Looking forward to that. I have another question.
You know what the publisher really likes? When you tell him, okay, we replace these dials with nothing, just your hands.
they just see savings.
Yeah. Oh, the dollars just went down. Margins go up.
I have another audience question from J.R. Honeycutt, one of the hosts for Nerd Nighters, and so he's got a question here for Bruno. He'd like to know how you feel. Do you feel called to use the medium of game design to express your feelings about the shooting? And also he'd like to know if you have any fears with regards to your ability to express yourself now.
Well, I don't use the media of game design to express my... I usually don't express my opinions through game design. I design games just to game I want to play and to have fun, and I think it's important to have games that bring you out, in this exotic Oriental world. If we go back to Catan, so I don't want to. I couldn't make a game about it, but I think I use mostly my blog, for example, and to give opinions on what happens, and also in a way how what I do as a game designer can have some importance and something to reality. It was the same with Catan. I made this serious article about post-colonial Catan. It doesn't mean I want to make a serious post-colonial game.
No.
I don't want to do it because I wouldn't want to play it. So here it's a bit the same, but so I think it's an opportunity because there was this stuff about Meeple. I also wrote an article on my blog yesterday about this, and but I'm a political guy, but I don't use games to make politics. But I can talk about politics and games. It's not the same, I think.
Right.
Well, I kind of wanted to come back to chaos and come back to Eric as well, because we were speaking about a sandbox, the idea of a sandbox game, and a sandbox game is obviously kind of one of the most chaotic things that you could design for from the player's perspective, or could be. So I maybe wanted you to riff a little bit on the concept of how much rope you give the players and when do they hang themselves.
Yeah.
In general, or you think
just in general design, but if you want to speak about chaos in the old world, that's probably a good place to start.
Well, so one of the I think I've quoted many times as saying, like, I love games that are open-ended and scary, right? Where the game itself, where the interaction is so high and the game is and the game balance is so delicate that it feels like when you're playing the game, if you took 1 percentage point off to the left, it would have completely gone off rails and been destroyed. Those are to me, those are the most exciting games, right? And they also feel like they're the most tinker-proof games. However, those games do rely a lot on game theory actually playing out rationally, right? Assuming everybody else wants to win, assuming that we don't end up with the classic kingmaker scenario or whatever. As far as how much rope to give players, I mean, if you think of it in terms of that, generally I try to dictate interaction as little as possible. When I'm talking to a design team, I like give them the minimal direction that the market will bear, right? So if it's possible, if it was possible to design a game with 2 sentences of rules, I'd do it. I'd do it tomorrow, right? In fact, let's do it after the show.
Awesome.
But so to me, complexity in games is a vice, right? It's a vice that I indulge in very often, as you know, because games that I make. But the way that I view complexity is something that as a toy that players play with, right? It's just stuff for them to play with and keep them occupied and keep them stimulated while they're interacting. But I would almost, like, every single time I publish a game, I always think, man, I wish I could cut like 10% out of this, right, and leave 10% more up to the players. So that's my general feeling.
Interesting. Bruno, I wanted to ask you almost a related question, not quite on the same vein, but Seth Jaffe just wrote an article on the League of Game Makers, I believe, where he talked about how it's the game author's responsibility to make sure that the players have a good time, have a good experience. Not necessarily that they all win, but that they have a good game experience. What's your thoughts on that in terms of chaos, open box kind of games, and interaction?
Well, of course. Well, I think it sounds obvious that the goal of a game is to give good experience to players. It can be in a very, you play chess because you think it's interesting and challenging, and you play role-playing games because you have fun interacting with your friends. If you don't have a good experience playing, you just don't play that game again. So yes, I think it's a responsibility. It's just our job to make a game which players will enjoy playing. So I really don't know what more I can say because, yeah, of course I agree.
That's okay. I think Eric has a lot to say.
Eric has a lot to say, I'm sure. Yeah. Go for it, Eric.
A lot to say. I mean, I agree with I agree with the sentiment that it is our responsibility to make sure players have a good time, but that's really just a sentiment, though, right? Like, it's the important nugget there is the how, not the why.
Right.
Like, the way I view it is that, like, if you take that to an extreme, right, then every game is on rails 100%, right? And they're all like fully guided tutorial-esque experiences, which are like, we wouldn't want that either, right? But so the way I actually view, from that point of view, I would view the way I would view the designer's role a lot like the director's role in a Hollywood movie, right? A little bit more hands off. That our job is to put together a tool set that inspires players to have fun, inspires players to open up and interact in different ways than they're used to, maybe even pull them out of their comfort zone a little bit. That's our job, right? The players have to take it. They got to take the ball and bring it home. But if we do it right, and this is one of the reasons I like Bruno's games so much, right? The template that they offer you is very, very well thought out, and they give you, like, he uses a very minimal tool set to do it, but the tools are there, right? Not everybody is ultimately creative. Not everybody is good under pressure. That game, a good set of game rules is like a safety valve for that. They take the pressure off of the players, they take the spotlight off the players, but they let the players indulge in creativity by giving them a springboard. And I think that's the way I would interpret what Seth means.
Just one thing. I think that's what we are doing because that's what we like to play. There are people who would rather play, chess or play at casino and not have any real decision, because that's the way they have a good time. So it's other people can design game for them.
Absolutely.
We just design games for people who like to play the kind of games we like to play.
Absolutely. Well, I want to piggyback on that. One of my favorite games that I play with my wife, Bruno, you designed with the other Bruno that we're not talking about, is Mission Red Planet, and he had given a little bit of a spoiler that's coming out again, and that you're working on that. I was curious, are there any other games that you can give any spoilers or hints that are coming out soon? I noticed 2015 you have Attila and Space Station Argo coming out. Can you tell us anything about those or any other games that you're working on?
Okay. Let's think. I think I have to open my website and see the list because
it's so darn big.
That sounds like a great problem.
At the
doesn't
moment,
know what actually coming out.
Something I really cannot tell about.
That's fair. Whatever, without getting you in trouble.
Keops is a very nice two-player games I made with Serge Lager long ago, which were very, very badly published. And there will be, I think, a really nice-looking edition next year. It's illustrated by Josh Capper, which I love his illustration.
Hey, we love Josh too. Yay, Josh.
He never illustrated any one of my games before, so I'm very, very glad of it.
That's exciting.
So I think the new Keops will be something really, really great. Awesome. Also, with the other Bruno, we have a two-player games called Raptor, which will be out next year.
Yeah, it's Raptor. I remember seeing the pictures.
For this game, the work between the other Bruno was very simple. I had the idea of the game, something like it needed 5 minutes, and then he worked 2 years on it.
That sounds like a good relationship.
I gotta work with Bruno.
Seriously. Oh well, I'm gonna pass it. I mean, we're running out of time, so at this time we usually go to our final question. So I'm gonna pass to Dylan to ask Eric our final question, and then Sen with Bruno, and I'll wrap the show. So to you, Dylan.
But we've asked Eric this question before, but
well, you could respin it. Make it based on the theme of the show.
Okay, so we've asked you before, what would you tell a starting designer? That's kind of what our typical question is. But let me ask you about an answer that you've previously given, and that's how can you give more space to the designer? How can you cut down on those rules? How can you get your hands off those rules and let the players play?
How can you get your hands off those rules? Oh, so if this is advice to a new designer, right? Mm-hmm. So this will sound a little silly, but it's in line with one of the new pieces of advice I give to designers a lot, which is make mistakes. Make lots of mistakes. Don't go to seminars and listen to people and listen to how to avoid mistakes. Make them. You've got to make them to internalize it. So in that vein, I would advise to take a set of rules that you're working on, like grab a D20. If you don't know what a D20 is, do that first. Learn that first. Take a D20, roll it, roll it and take the paragraph in your rules that it rolled, take it out, play it, see if you miss it. If you don't miss it, don't use it. Just keep doing it over and over and over again. You're going to make some really, really crappy games, but remember, this is what new designers were talking about. The process of doing that hatchet job on your game is going to teach you so much about how games are put together, how they synthesize, and how to get emerging complexity from parts, and it will surprise you. Right? I've done that before, by the way. Like, this exact crazy thing I'm talking about. I've taken games and I've thrown gum at the rules page, and just cut everything that the gum landed close to. Right? And
okay.
It doesn't always work.
That totally sounds like something Friedemann would do.
You have heard it from Eric Lang. Thou shalt go out to your game and throw gum at it. That is what you shall do.
It sounds like chaos in the old rules, actually.
Oh, that was bad.
Oh, that was so bad. I know.
Okay, he's a dad. He's allowed.
No comment.
Bad dad comment. Bruno, I want to ask you the same question before we wrap. What in your experience would you tell a novice game designer, and let's frame it in terms of what we're talking about today, what would you tell a novice game designer who is having problems getting players to interact with each other? What's a good way to do that?
I'd say more or less the same thing as Eric. Make things simple. Because, the more rules, the more stuff there is in a game, the more easy it is for the player to more or less hide behind the rules, hide behind the components, the pieces, and the board, and just manipulate them, and you don't see the actual player. You have to have a game where you can look the other players right through the eyes and try to guess what he's doing or try to blackmail him or anything, but so that they cannot hide behind, their little the game pieces. So make rules. Rules are just a way for players to interact in a different way than they do in daily life. They are not something to... A game must not feel like it is played by a computer. It must feel like it is played with human beings. A good game is a game that cannot be played by a computer.
Good advice there. Well, I just sad and remiss to wrap this show up. We do have an after show, and I don't know if Bruno will fall asleep again, need to go back to bed, or if Eric will stay up with us as well. But I just want to say we'll post our after show on Friday. I want to thank our guests for coming on tonight. I want to give a shout out to next week. We have David Short coming on the show, and also we have Cardboard Edison, and they're excellent Twitter, blog, all that stuff. But they specifically are going to be talking about a survey they recently did where they interviewed or they surveyed a variety of designers and have tabulated the results. So some interesting questions about contracts and royalties and all that kind of stuff. So really useful, practical information for designers to hear about. I also want to give a quick plug. Don't forget Nerd Nighters next Wednesday. Check them out. They're going to be announcing the 24 contestants that are in the design contest. And also, hopefully, if everything goes right, we will have our Kickstarter for Meeple Syrup up for February. So thanks so much for watching. Keep designing great games, and we'll see you soon.